A billionaire returned home unannounced. A poor girl with a birth certificate was waiting for him. He was paralyzed when he saw his own name. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Richard stood frozen on his own doorstep, the birth certificate trembling in his hands, while Emma waited with the patience only a child who'd learned to expect disappointment could possess. "James," he called to his driver without taking his eyes off the little girl, "cancel my dinner with the Morrison group. Reschedule everything tomorrow." Emma's face brightened with cautious hope. "Does that mean—" "It means we need to talk." Richard's voice was gentler than he'd intended. "Have you eaten today?" She shook her head, blonde hair catching the last rays of sunlight. "I've been waiting since this morning. I walked here from the bus station." "Walked?" Richard's throat tightened. His estate was 15 miles from the nearest bus stop. This child had walked 15 miles to find him. "Come inside, Emma." He opened the massive oak doors, revealing the marble foyer that had been featured in Architectural Digest. "We'll figure this out." As they entered, Emma's gasp echoed through the space. Her green eyes, his eyes, widened as she took in the crystal chandelier, the sweeping staircase, the oil paintings worth more than most people's houses. "Is this really where you live?" she whispered. "Yes." Richard suddenly saw his home through her eyes, cold, impressive, but hardly a place for a child. "Are you hungry?" Emma nodded eagerly. Richard led her to the kitchen, where his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was preparing to leave for the day. "Mrs. Chen, could you prepare something for Emma here?" The elderly woman's eyebrows shot up at the sight of the disheveled child, but her professional composure never wavered. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. What would you like, sweetheart?" "Anything," Emma said quickly. "I'm not picky." As Mrs. Chen bustled about preparing a meal, Richard studied the birth certificate again. Everything appeared legitimate. The hospital, the date, even Sarah's signature. But 8 years. Why had Sarah never told him? "Emma," he said carefully, sitting across from her at the breakfast bar. "Tell me about your mother. What did she say about me?" Emma's face grew serious, older than her years. "She said you were a good man who worked very hard. She said you didn't know about me because she was scared." "Scared of what?" "That you wouldn't want me." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "She said rich people sometimes don't want regular kids." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Sarah had been protecting him or protecting Emma from potential rejection. Either way, she'd robbed them both of 7 years. "Your mother was wrong about that," Richard said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. But even as he spoke the words, a part of his mind was already calculating. Paternity test, legal implications, media management. His orderly world demanded proof, procedures, protocols. Yet looking at Emma's hopeful face, Richard realized with startling clarity that no test was necessary. Those were definitely his eyes, looking back at him. The guest bedroom on the 2nd floor had never housed a 7-year-old girl in dirty clothes, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Richard stood in the doorway, watching Mrs. Chen help Emma into one of his old Columbia University t-shirts that hung on her tiny frame like a dress. "The clothes we ordered should arrive tomorrow," Mrs. Chen said quietly, joining him in the hallway. Poor little thing fell asleep the moment she touched the pillow. Richard nodded, unable to look away from Emma's peaceful face. In sleep, the resemblance was even stronger. The same stubborn jawline he saw in the mirror every morning, the same way her brow furrowed slightly, as if even her dreams required serious consideration. "Sir?" Mrs. Chen's voice was carefully neutral. "Might I suggest, perhaps Dr. Morrison could recommend someone who specializes in these situations." Dr. Morrison, his family physician and golf partner, a man who'd been discreetly handling Richard's private matters for over a decade. Richard nodded slowly. This would require more than just a paternity test. Emma would need medical care, psychological evaluation, proper documentation for school enrollment. School. The word stopped him cold. He knew nothing about schools, about children, about anything Emma would need. His phone buzzed with the familiar sound of urgent business, but for the first time in his adult life, Richard Blackwell ignored it. At 3 a.m., he found himself in his study, surrounded by legal pads covered with lists and questions. Emma's quiet sobs had woken him an hour ago. Nightmares, he assumed, though she'd fallen back asleep before he could decide whether to comfort her. What did he know about comforting a grieving child? About bedtime stories or scraped knees or any of the 1,000 small intimacies of parenthood? His laptop glowed with urgent emails from Tokyo, London, Dubai. Deals worth millions hung in the balance, waiting for his attention. But all Richard could think about was the way Emma had looked at him when he'd said her mother was wrong, like he'd handed her the moon itself. A soft sound from the hallway made him look up. Emma stood in the doorway, drowning in his t-shirt, her blonde hair a mess of tangles. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Richard set aside his legal pad. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head, then padded barefoot across the Persian rug to stand beside his chair. "Mama used to let me sit with her when I couldn't sleep." Without overthinking it, Richard lifted Emma onto his lap. She curled against him like a small, warm animal, and something deep in his chest loosened. A knot he hadn't even realized was there. "Tell me about your mama," he said softly. "She smelled like vanilla and coffee," Emma murmured against his shoulder. "She sang when she was happy and hummed when she was sad. She was sad a lot, especially when the cancer came back." Richard's arms tightened around her. Sarah had fought this battle before. "She kept a picture of you," Emma added drowsily, "in her jewelry box. She said you were the smartest man she ever knew." As Emma's breathing evened out in sleep, Richard stared out the window at his perfectly manicured grounds and wondered if Sarah had been right about his intelligence. Because the smartest man in the world would have found a way to save the woman he'd loved and the child he'd never known existed. The private investigator's report arrived by courier at precisely 10 a.m., 3 days after Richard had hired the best firm money could buy. Emma was upstairs with Mrs. Chen, learning to work the complicated shower system in her new bathroom, her delighted laughter echoing through the house like music. Richard opened the manila envelope with steady hands, but his composure cracked as he read the single-page summary. Sarah Mitchell, deceased, age 32, cause of death, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Previous diagnosis, leukemia, age 24, treated successfully at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Subject worked for Blackwell Enterprises from March 2016 to August 2017. Left employment without notice. No subsequent contact with former employer. Financial records indicate significant medical debt. Subject worked multiple part-time positions while undergoing treatment. Child placed in temporary foster care during final hospitalization. Foster care. Richard's hands clenched around the paper. Emma had been in foster care while her mother died alone in a hospital bed. The detailed report was worse. Photos of the cramped apartment where Sarah had raised Emma, receipts for second-hand clothes and discount groceries, medical bills that would have been pocket change to Richard, but had apparently consumed Sarah's entire existence. "She worked 3 jobs," Emma's voice came from the doorway. Richard looked up to find her watching him with those knowing green eyes. After she got sick again, she could only work 2. "Emma, you shouldn't. I'm not supposed to look at grown-up papers. Mama told me that too." She climbed onto the chair beside him, her new clothes, jeans and a pink sweater that actually fit, making her look more like the 7-year-old she was. But I learned to read really good because Mama said smart girls ask questions. Richard set the report aside, his heart hammering. What kind of questions? Like why Mama cried when she looked at your picture, and why she never called you when we needed help with the rent. Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, but her fingers twisted in her lap. And why she said you were good, but maybe not good for us. The words stung because they held an uncomfortable truth. 8 years ago, Richard had been consumed with building his empire. He'd worked 18-hour days, traveled constantly, and had little patience for anything that didn't contribute to his bottom line. If Sarah had come to him pregnant, would he have been ready for fatherhood? Or would he have seen Emma as an obstacle to his ambitions? Your mama was protecting you, Richard said carefully. I know. Emma leaned against his arm with surprising trust. But she's gone now, and I found you anyway, so maybe she was wrong about that too. Before Richard could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID made his blood run cold. Victoria Blackwell, his mother. Richard, darling, I just heard the most bizarre rumor from Margaret Morrison. Something about you harboring a vagrant child. Victoria's cultured voice could have cut glass. Please tell me this is some misguided charity project. Richard looked down at Emma, who was watching him with careful attention. Even at 7, she understood that this conversation would determine her fate. Actually, Mother, Richard said, his voice steady as steel, I'd like you to meet your granddaughter. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and in that silence, Richard realized he'd just declared war on his own family. Victoria Blackwell arrived at the estate exactly 90 minutes after Richard's phone call, stepping from her silver Mercedes with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. At 65, she remained formidable, perfectly coiffed, impeccably dressed, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting the family name. Richard met her at the door, Emma's small hand clasped firmly in his. Well, Victoria's sharp blue eyes assessed Emma from head to toe. She certainly has the Blackwell jaw, though that hair... She sniffed delicately, clearly from the mother's side. Emma, Richard said calmly, this is your grandmother, Victoria. Emma stepped forward with surprising poise. Hello, Mrs. Blackwell. It's nice to meet you. Victoria's eyebrows rose at the child's manners. Indeed. Richard, we need to speak privately. Anything you have to say can be said in front of Emma. I sincerely doubt that. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. Unless you think a child should hear about paternity tests, custody arrangements, and media management strategies. Emma's hand tightened in Richard's. It's okay, she whispered. I can go play. After Emma disappeared upstairs, Victoria's mask slipped. Have you completely lost your mind? You accept some random child's word that she's yours without any verification? The tabloids will have a field day. The paternity test is scheduled for tomorrow morning, but I don't need it. Oh, Richard. Victoria sank into his leather chair like a queen claiming her throne. Your father and I didn't build this empire for you to throw it away on some gold-digger's bastard. Emma's mother is dead, Richard said quietly, dangerously, and that child upstairs is my daughter. Allegedly your daughter. Do you have any idea what this will do to the Morrison merger, to your IPO plans? Margaret Morrison is already making noises about family values and responsible leadership. Richard had forgotten about the Morrison Group merger, a deal 18 months in the making that would expand his empire into international markets. Thomas Morrison was old-school conservative, the kind of man who believed in traditional families and moral certainty. The merger will survive. Will it? When the press learns that America's most eligible bachelor has been hiding an illegitimate child? When they start digging into the mother's background, her financial troubles, the implications about your character? Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Or we can handle this quietly. A generous trust fund, excellent private schooling, discreet placement with a loving family. Emma would want for nothing, and you could visit whenever appropriate. You want me to give her away. I want you to be practical. You know nothing about raising children, Richard. This house isn't suitable for a 7-year-old. Your lifestyle isn't compatible with parenthood. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt. I've taken the liberty of contacting Harrison, Phillips and Associates. They specialize in these delicate family situations. Very discreet, very efficient. From upstairs came the sound of Emma's laughter as she played with some new toy Mrs. Chen had found for her. The sound stopped Victoria mid-sentence. She's happy here, Richard said. Children are resilient. She'll adapt to wherever she's placed. Like I adapted when you sent me to boarding school at 8. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. That was different. You were being prepared to inherit an empire. And Emma? What is she being prepared for? A normal life, away from the pressures and expectations that come with the Blackwell name. Richard walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where Emma had spent the morning playing, her first carefree moments in who knew how long. The girl who'd walked 15 miles to find him deserved better than being quietly shuffled away for the sake of convenience. No, he said simply. Richard, she stays. The merger will happen or it won't. The IPO will proceed or it won't. But Emma stays. Victoria gathered her purse with sharp, angry movements. You're making a terrible mistake. When this blows up in your face, when you realize you're not equipped for this responsibility, don't come crying to me. At the door she paused. And Richard, that paternity test better come back positive, because if it doesn't, if you've been taken in by some elaborate con game, the family will not forget. As her Mercedes disappeared down the driveway, Emma appeared at Richard's side. She doesn't like me, Emma said with surprising calm. Richard knelt to her level, meeting those familiar green eyes. She doesn't know you yet. Sometimes adults are afraid of change. Mama said fear makes people mean sometimes. Your mama was very wise. Emma slipped her small hand into his much larger one. Are you afraid? Richard considered lying, giving her the reassurance she needed. Instead, he chose honesty. Terrified. Emma's smile could have powered the entire estate. That's okay. Mama was scared sometimes too, but she said love is braver than fear. And in that moment, Richard realized his daughter was already teaching him things he'd never learned in all his years of building empires. Doctor. Morrison's office had been Richard's sanctuary for private medical matters for over a decade, but today the familiar mahogany walls felt like a courtroom. Emma sat beside him, swinging her legs from the oversized chair, completely unaware that the next few minutes would determine both their futures. Mr. Blackwell, Dr. Morrison entered with the manila envelope that held their answers. Emma, how are you settling in? Really good, Emma beamed. Mrs. Chen taught me how to make pancakes, and Richard has a library with more books than the whole public library back home. Dr. Morrison smiled, but his eyes were serious as he met Richard's gaze. Perhaps Emma would like to see the fish tank in my waiting room while we discuss the results. I want to stay, Emma said firmly. This is about me, too. Richard's throat tightened. Even at 7, she understood that this moment would change everything. It's okay, Dr. Morrison. She should hear this. The doctor opened the envelope with practiced efficiency. The paternity test is conclusive. Richard, you are Emma's biological father. Probability of paternity, 97%. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated relief. Does that mean I can stay? Emma's voice was small, hopeful. It means you're exactly where you belong, Richard said, his voice rough with emotion. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. There's something else. The medical records from Emma's mother include some concerning information. Richard's attention sharpened. What kind of concerning? Sarah Mitchell's leukemia wasn't her first battle with the disease. She was initially diagnosed at 14, went into remission, relapsed at 22, achieved remission again, then the pancreatic cancer developed as a secondary condition. Emma had gone very still beside him. The genetic markers suggest a hereditary component. Dr. Morrison continued carefully. I'd recommend comprehensive genetic testing for Emma. Early detection could be crucial if she's inherited the predisposition. Richard's world tilted. He'd just found his daughter, and now he might lose her to the same disease that had claimed Sarah. What does that mean? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Morrison knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle. It means we're going to take very good care of you, sweetheart. Make sure you stay healthy and strong. After scheduling Emma's genetic testing, they drove home in thoughtful silence. Richard's mind raced with possibilities, treatments, the best specialists money could buy. He wouldn't lose Emma the way he'd lost Sarah. Richard? Emma's voice broke into his planning. Are you sad that I'm really your daughter? The question stopped him cold. Why would you think that? Because now you're stuck with me, and I might get sick like Mama. Richard pulled the car over, his hands shaking as he turned to face her. Emma Elizabeth Mitchell, you listened to me very carefully. Finding out you're my daughter is the single best thing that's ever happened to me. Do you understand? Tears welled in her green eyes. Even if I get sick, especially if you get sick. Because that means you'll have the best doctors, the best treatment, and a father who will fight for you every single day. Emma launched herself across the car seat into his arms, her small body shaking with sobs of relief. I love you, Daddy. The word, Daddy, hit him like a physical force. In 7 days, his entire world had been reorganized around this small, brave girl who'd walked 15 miles to find him. I love you too, sweetheart, he whispered into her blonde hair. More than you'll ever know. But even as he held her, Richard's mind was already working. The genetic testing would take weeks. Victoria's threats about the merger loomed, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a darker thought had taken root. Sarah had known about the genetic risks. She'd lived with the knowledge that Emma might inherit her medical history. Yet she'd still chosen to have their child, to raise her alone, rather than burden Richard with a potentially sick daughter. What else had Sarah known that she'd never told him? And what other secrets was he about to discover? The photograph on the front page of the New York Chronicle was devastatingly clear. Richard Blackwell, billionaire bachelor, holding hands with a blonde 7-year-old girl outside Central Park's playground. The headline screamed, Blackwell's secret, billionaire's hidden daughter emerges. Richard's phone had been ringing non-stop since 6 a.m. By 8 a.m., news vans lined his estate's gates like hungry wolves. Emma sat at the breakfast table, oblivious to the chaos, carefully cutting her pancakes into perfect squares, a habit she'd developed since moving in. Why are there so many cars outside? She asked, peering through the window. Reporters, Richard said grimly, scrolling through increasingly frantic emails from his board of directors. People who write stories about other people. Are they going to write about me? Before Richard could answer, Mrs. Chen appeared with a grim expression. Sir, there's a woman at the gate claiming to be from Child Protective Services. She says someone called in a welfare check. Richard's blood ran cold. Emma, go upstairs to your room. Take your tablet and headphones. But I haven't finished. Now, sweetheart, please. Emma must have heard something in his voice, because she obeyed immediately, her small footsteps echoing on the marble stairs. Richard waited until he heard her bedroom door close before calling his attorney. Marcus, I need you here immediately. CPS is at my gate, and the media's having a field day. Already on my way. Marcus Reed's voice was crisp, professional. Don't say anything to anyone until I arrive. And Richard, this isn't random. Someone orchestrated this. 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived with a CPS caseworker named Janet Martinez, a stern woman in her 50s who surveyed Richard's opulent home with barely concealed skepticism. "Mr. Blackwell, we received an anonymous tip expressing concern about a minor child living in an unsuitable environment," Ms. Martinez said, notepad ready. "I need to interview the child privately and assess the living situation." "The living situation is perfectly." Marcus placed a warning hand on Richard's arm. "Of course, we'll cooperate fully." Emma's interview lasted an excruciating hour. Richard paced his study like a caged animal, while Marcus fielded calls from reporters offering six-figure sums for exclusive interviews. Finally, Ms. Martinez emerged. "The child appears healthy, well-adjusted, and genuinely happy," she reported. "However, Mr. Blackwell, I'm concerned about the sudden life change and media attention. Emma mentioned her mother died recently. She's still processing grief while adapting to a completely new environment." "What are you recommending?" Richard asked. "Mandatory counseling sessions for Emma, weekly home visits for the next month, and—" She hesitated. "Perhaps consideration of a more stable, private placement until this media circus dies down." Stable placement, code for foster care or worse, giving Emma to Victoria's discreet family solution. "That won't be necessary," Richard said firmly. "Emma stays with me." After Ms. Martinez left, Richard found Emma in her room, curled up with her worn, stuffed rabbit, staring out the window at the news vans. "Are they going to take me away?" she asked without turning around. Richard sat on her bed, careful not to crowd her. "No one is taking you anywhere. You're my daughter and this is your home." "But the lady said, the lady is just doing her job, making sure you're safe and happy." Emma finally looked at him, tears tracking down her cheeks. "I don't want to be famous, I just want to stay with you." Richard pulled her into his arms, his heart breaking. In 1 week, this brave little girl had gone from losing her mother to gaining a father, to becoming tabloid fodder. All because he'd been too proud, too focused on his empire to find Sarah when she'd disappeared 8 years ago. "We'll get through this," he promised. "Together." But even as he spoke the words, Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Morrison. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Merger vote moved up. This changes everything." The wolves weren't just at his gates anymore. They were closing in for the kill. The Morrison Group's boardroom felt like a gladiatorial arena, 32 floors above Manhattan's financial district. Thomas Morrison sat at the head of the mahogany table like a judge preparing to render verdict, his steel-grey eyes fixed on Richard with disappointment that cut deeper than anger. 18 months of negotiations," Morrison said without preamble. 18 months of building trust, establishing partnerships, planning integration, and now this. He slid that morning's Financial Times across the table. The headline read, "Blackwell Empire Shaken by Paternity Scandal." Below it, a smaller story. Sources close to Morrison Group question merger. "Tom, this doesn't change anything about the deal's fundamentals," Richard said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "The synergies, the market expansion potential—" "It changes everything about you," Morrison interrupted. "About your judgment, your character, your ability to lead a combined organization." Margaret Morrison, Thomas's daughter and the company's VP of Strategic Development, leaned forward. "Our shareholders are already asking questions. The Presbyterian Church Pension Fund, one of our largest investors, has expressed moral concerns about the merger." Richard's jaw tightened. The Presbyterian Church Pension Fund represented nearly $2 billion in Morrison Group assets. "My personal life shouldn't factor into business decisions." "Shouldn't it?" Thomas's voice was granite. "You're asking our family company to merge with yours. That makes your family our business. And frankly, Richard, the optics are terrible. Thomas pulled out his tablet, scrolling through articles. Billionaire hides illegitimate child while mother dies in poverty. Blackwell's baby mama worked 3 jobs while he bought another yacht. The narrative writes itself. Those stories are true, Margaret finished. Because that's what matters in today's market. Perception is reality, especially for family-focused brands like ours. Richard thought of Emma, probably in her room right now, trying to understand why grown-ups were angry at her for simply existing. My daughter isn't a narrative. She's a 7-year-old girl who lost her mother. A daughter you knew nothing about, Thomas pointed out. What else don't you know, Richard? What other surprises might surface during integration? The question hung heavy in the air. Richard's private investigators had found no other secrets, but Thomas was right. If Sarah could hide Emma for 7 years, what else might be buried? I'm prepared to offer additional concessions, Richard said. Extended warranties on the tech integration, performance guarantees. This isn't about money. Thomas stood, signaling the meeting's end. It's about trust, about the kind of man we're binding our legacy to. Margaret remained seated as her father moved toward the door. Richard, I'll be direct. The board meets tomorrow to vote on the merger. Right now, you don't have the votes. What would it take to get them? Margaret's smile was sympathetic but firm. Honestly, a time machine. The damage to your reputation, the questions about your judgment, they're not going away. Unless, Richard pressed, unless you demonstrate that you're prioritizing responsibility over impulse, that you're thinking about what's best for everyone involved, not just what you want. The implication was clear. Give up Emma, and the merger proceeds. Keep her, and watch 18 months of work crumble. After the Morrison Group executives left, Richard stood alone in the boardroom, staring out at the city he'd spent 20 years conquering. His empire sprawled below him. Office buildings, manufacturing facilities, research centers, 40,000 employees depending on his decisions. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mrs. Chen is teaching me to make your favorite cookies for when you come home. Love you, Daddy. Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. He'd built his fortune by making hard decisions, by choosing long-term success over short-term comfort. But this wasn't business. This was his daughter. His phone rang, Victoria calling with what would undoubtedly be an I told you so lecture, wrapped in maternal concern. He let it go to voicemail. Tomorrow's board vote would determine more than just a merger. It would determine what kind of man Richard Blackwell truly was, and whether love could triumph over a lifetime of putting business first. Dr. Morrison's voice carried the weight of experience as he spread Emma's genetic test results across his desk. Emma sat between Richard and Mrs. Chen, her small hands folded in her lap, with the patience she'd learned from too many hospital waiting rooms with her mother. The results are complex, Dr. Morrison began carefully. Emma does carry genetic markers that increase her risk for certain cancers, particularly blood cancers, like her mother's leukemia. Richard's hand found Emma's, squeezing gently. What does that mean exactly? It means Emma has approximately a 30% higher risk than the general population. However, Doctor, Morrison emphasized quickly, seeing Emma's worried expression, it also means we can monitor her closely, implement preventive measures, and catch any problems incredibly early. Will I get sick like Mama? Emma's voice was barely audible. Dr. Morrison knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle. We don't know, sweetheart. But here's what we do know. Medicine has improved dramatically since your mother was first diagnosed. We have better treatments, better detection methods, and most importantly, we're watching you very carefully. Richard's mind was already racing ahead to treatment protocols, the best pediatric oncologists money could buy, research facilities that could dedicate resources to Emma's specific genetic profile. If she did develop cancer, she would have advantages Sarah never had. "There's something else," Dr. Morrison continued, returning to his desk. The genetic analysis revealed another interesting finding. Emma's blood type is AB negative, extremely rare, less than 1% of the population. "Is that bad?" Emma asked. "Not bad, just unusual. It means you're a universal plasma donor. Your plasma can help lots of other people. You're special, Emma." Emma brightened at this news, and Richard felt a momentary lightening of the crushing weight on his chest. Then Dr. Morrison's expression grew more serious. "Richard, I need to discuss long-term care planning. Given Emma's genetic profile, she'll need regular monitoring, blood work every 3 months, imaging annually, genetic counseling. The costs will be significant even with your resources. Money isn't an issue, I know, but there's another consideration: stability. These medical protocols work best when there's consistency in care, minimal stress, and a stable living environment." Richard understood the subtext immediately. The media circus, the custody challenges, the business pressures, all of it created stress that could potentially impact Emma's health. "Dr. Morrison," Mrs. Chen spoke up quietly, "may I ask something? If Emma's mother knew about these genetic risks, why didn't she prepare differently?" Dr. Morrison glanced at Richard, then back at Mrs. Chen. According to Sarah's medical records, she was counseled extensively about the risks of having children. She chose to proceed because she believed Emma deserved a chance at life, regardless of the potential challenges. She believed Emma deserved a chance at life. The words echoed in Richard's mind as they drove home. Sarah had known the risks, had chosen to have Emma anyway, and then had spent 7 years protecting her from those same risks while battling her own cancer. "Daddy," Emma's voice broke into his thoughts, "are you sad about my blood?" "I'm not sad about anything to do with you," Richard said honestly. "I'm grateful that we know what to watch for." "And grateful that Mama had me even though it was scary?" Richard's throat tightened, especially grateful for that. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Richard stood in his study surrounded by medical journals and research papers. His laptop displayed contact information for the world's leading pediatric genetic specialists. Money could buy the best care, the latest treatments, experimental protocols, but it couldn't buy certainty. It couldn't guarantee that Emma wouldn't face the same battle that had killed her mother. His phone buzzed with yet another urgent message from his board of directors. The Morrison Group vote was tomorrow, and his personal crisis was becoming a corporate catastrophe. Richard closed the laptop and walked upstairs to check on Emma. She was sleeping peacefully, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. In sleep, she looked impossibly young and vulnerable. He thought of Sarah, making the choice to have this child despite knowing the risks, loving Emma enough to give her life, even if that life might be shorter than hoped. Tomorrow, he would face his own impossible choice, the merger that would secure his business empire, or the daughter who had become his entire world. But tonight, watching Emma sleep, Richard realized the choice had already been made. Some things were worth more than money. Some battles were worth everything. The storage unit Sarah had rented was in Queens, far from the gleaming towers of Manhattan, where Richard conducted his empire building. Emma held his hand tightly as they walked down the narrow corridor between metal doors, following the address from Sarah's final paperwork. "She never told me about this place," Emma said quietly. "I thought we kept everything in our apartment." "Third." Richard's private investigator had discovered the unit while finalizing Sarah's estate paperwork. A monthly rental fee automatically deducted from her checking account for the past 3 years. The contents were a mystery Sarah had taken to her grave. Unit 247 opened with a rusty screech, revealing a space no bigger than a closet. Inside, 3 cardboard boxes, a small cedar chest, and a manila envelope marked "For Richard" in Sarah's familiar handwriting. Richard's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to him at Blackwell Enterprises, all returned to sender. The postmark spanned 7 years, from just after Emma's birth to 6 months before Sarah's death. The first letter was dated 3 weeks after Emma was born. "Richard, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I had to try. We have a daughter. Her name is Emma, and she has your eyes and your stubborn chin. I'm not asking for anything, I just thought you should know she exists." Richard's vision blurred. "Returned to sender. Recipient refused delivery" was stamped across the top in red ink. The second letter, 6 months later. "Richard, I tried calling, but your assistant said you don't take personal calls. Emma is crawling now. She's curious about everything, just like you were when we talked about your business dreams. I'm working part-time at a daycare, so I can bring her with me. We're okay, but I wanted you to know about the milestones you're missing." Again, returned undelivered. Emma peered over his arm, sounding out the words she could read. "That's about me as a baby?" "Yes, sweetheart. Your mama was trying to tell me about you." Richard flipped through letter after letter, each one returned unopened. Sarah describing Emma's first words, her first steps, her first day of school. Photos included Emma as a toddler, Emma missing her front teeth, Emma in a school play. 7 years of his daughter's life, documented and returned unread. The final letter was different. The envelope opened, the contents clearly read, "Richard, I'm dying. The cancer is back, and this time there won't be a miracle. I've enclosed Emma's birth certificate and medical records. She's healthy now, but there are genetic risks you need to know about. I've never told her about you because I thought you didn't want us. But if something happens to me, please find it in your heart to love her. She's the best part of both of us." Richard's hands shook as he read the final line. "I never stopped loving you." Sarah: "Daddy, why are you crying?" Emma's voice was small, worried. Richard knelt to her level, his mind racing. "Emma, these letters. Your mama tried to contact me many times. I never received them." "Why not?" That was the million-dollar question. Richard's incoming mail was screened by his assistant, but returned to sender meant something else entirely. Someone had actively intercepted these letters, refused delivery, kept him from knowing about Emma for 7 years. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." In the cedar chest, they found Sarah's jewelry box, the one Emma had mentioned that contained Richard's photo. But it also contained something else: business cards from Harrison, Phillips and Associates, the law firm Victoria had mentioned, and a letter on their letterhead dated 2 years ago. "Ms. Mitchell, as we discussed, Mr. Blackwell has no interest in acknowledging paternity or establishing any relationship with the alleged child. Any further attempts to contact him will result in legal action. We recommend you accept the settlement offer and agree to permanent non-disclosure." The settlement offer was attached: $50,000 in exchange for Sarah's silence and Emma's hidden existence. Sarah had written "refused" across the offer in her own handwriting. Richard's phone was already dialing as they walked back to the car. "Mother," he said when Victoria answered, his voice deadly calm. "We need to talk. Now." "Richard, darling, if this is about that Morrison Group nonsense—" "It's about the letters, Victoria, Sarah's letters, the ones that were returned to sender for 7 years. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "I suppose you've been busy playing detective," Victoria finally said, her mask slipping. You knew about Emma for years, and you kept her from me. I protected you from a situation that would have destroyed everything we built. That girl's mother was a gold digger who... That girl's mother died of cancer while working 3 jobs to support my daughter. Richard's voice echoed through the parking garage, causing Emma to move closer to his side. Victoria, if you ever, and I mean ever, interfere in my family again, I will destroy you, legally, financially, completely. You can't threaten me, Richard. I'm your mother. No, Richard said, looking down at Emma's concerned face. You're just someone who used to be important to me. He hung up and knelt beside Emma, whose green eyes were wide with understanding beyond her years. Your grandma Victoria did a bad thing, he said gently. She kept your mama's letters from reaching me. Is that why Mama thought you didn't want us? Yes, sweetheart. Your mama tried so hard to tell me about you, but I never knew. Emma considered this for a long moment, then slipped her hand into his. But you know now. Yes, now I know everything. But as they drove home, Richard realized the full scope of Victoria's betrayal was just beginning to unfold. And tomorrow's confrontation would determine whether the Blackwell family could survive the truth. Victoria Blackwell sat in Richard's study like a queen facing revolution, her silver hair perfectly styled despite being summoned at dawn. Emma was at school, her first day back since the media storm began, giving Richard the privacy he needed for what would either be a conversation or a declaration of war. You look terrible, darling, Victoria said coolly, noting the shadows under Richard's eyes. Perhaps if you'd listened to reason from the beginning, 7 years. Richard placed Sarah's returned letters on the desk between them. 7 years of intercepted mail, of deliberate interference, of keeping me from my daughter. Victoria barely glanced at the evidence. I did what was necessary to protect our family's interests. Our family? Richard's voice was deadly quiet. Emma is my family. Sarah Mitchell was a temporary distraction who got pregnant to trap you. Victoria's composure remained infuriatingly intact. I saved you from a lifetime of obligation to some gold digger's bastard. Don't, Richard's voice cut like a blade. Don't you ever call Emma that again. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. The Morrison Group vote is this afternoon. The board is already spooked by this paternity scandal. Do you really want to add family infighting to the mix? The Morrison Group can go to hell. 40,000 employees might disagree. Your shareholders certainly will. Richard, you're thinking with your emotions instead of your brain. Richard opened his laptop, turning the screen toward Victoria. Actually, I'm thinking quite clearly. Tell me, Mother, what do you see here? Victoria's face went pale as she read the screen. Financial records showing regular payments from her personal account to Harrison, Phillips and Associates. 7 years of legal fees, all traced back to her. You paid them to intercept Sarah's letters, to threaten her with legal action, to offer her hush money. I protected you. You stole 7 years of my daughter's life. Richard's control finally shattered. Emma grew up thinking her father didn't want her because you couldn't bear the thought of sharing me with anyone else. Victoria's mask slipped, revealing something desperate and angry underneath. You were mine first, Richard. I built this empire for you, sacrificed everything for your success. I wasn't about to let some nobody destroy what we'd accomplished. What we'd accomplished? Richard stood, towering over his mother. You mean what I accomplished while you manipulated my life from the shadows? Everything you have, you owe to the foundation I provided. The boarding schools, the connections, the careful cultivation of your image, the isolation, the emptiness, the complete inability to form real relationships because you taught me that everyone wanted something. Victoria's eyes flashed. And you think that little girl doesn't want something? You think she won't grow up expecting your money, your connections, your influence? I think she wants what every child wants, a father who loves her. Love. Victoria spat the word like poison. Love is what destroyed your father. His love for his secretary cost us millions in divorce settlements. Love makes men weak, Richard. Vulnerable. Richard suddenly understood. Victoria's manipulation wasn't about protecting the family empire. It was about preventing him from becoming his father, from choosing love over legacy. "I'm not him," Richard said quietly. "Aren't you? You're ready to throw away the Morrison merger, risk everything we've built, all for a child you've known 2 weeks." "Yes." The word came without hesitation. "I am." Victoria gathered her purse, her movements sharp with controlled fury. "Then you're a fool. And when this destroys you, when the board loses confidence, when the stock price collapses, when you realize you've chosen sentiment over sense, don't come crawling back to me." At the door, she paused. "That Morrison vote happens in 4 hours. You still have time to choose wisely." After she left, Richard sat alone in the study where he'd made countless million-dollar decisions. On his desk lay Sarah's letters, 7 years of love and hope, systematically destroyed by his own mother. On his computer screen, the Morrison Group contract waited for his final signature. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma's school. Emma had a wonderful first day back. She told everyone about her new daddy and invited half her class for a sleepover. "Hope that's okay, Mrs. Patterson." Richard smiled, his first genuine smile in days. Emma was making friends, building a life, trusting in their future together. The Morrison Group could vote however they wanted. He had more important things to worry about, like planning a sleepover for 8 7-year-olds. But as he reached for his phone to call the school back, it rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Blackwell, this is Detective Sarah Chen with NYPD. We need to discuss some irregularities we've discovered regarding your daughter's mother's death." Richard's blood turned to ice. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that suggest Sarah Mitchell's death might not have been as natural as everyone assumed." Detective Sarah Chen's badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the police station conference room. Richard sat across from her, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Emma was safely at school, unaware that her mother's death was being questioned. "Mr. Blackwell, during our investigation into the harassment allegations against your mother, we discovered some troubling patterns in Sarah Mitchell's medical records." Richard's stomach dropped. Harassment allegations. The intercepted letters, the legal threats, technically criminal harassment, but that's not why I called. Detective Chen opened a thick file. Sarah's oncologist flagged some inconsistencies in her final treatment records. Medications that should have helped were somehow making her worse. "I don't understand." "Neither did her doctors, until we found this." Detective Chen placed a small vial on the table, prescription medication with Victoria Blackwell's name on the label. "Warfarin, a blood thinner your mother takes for her heart condition. Completely harmless for someone healthy, but for a cancer patient undergoing chemotherapy." She paused. "It would accelerate organ failure, make recovery impossible." Richard's vision blurred. "You're saying my mother poisoned Sarah?" "We're saying someone with access to your mother's medication was systematically destroying Sarah Mitchell's chances of survival." Sarah's neighbor reported seeing an older woman visiting regularly, claiming to be from a charitable foundation. The room spun around Richard. Victoria hadn't just hidden Sarah's letters, she'd actively murdered the mother of his child. "There's more," Detective Chen continued. "We found Sarah's journal. The final entries describe feeling increasingly weak after the foundation visits, but she was afraid to complain because the woman promised private school scholarships for Emma." Richard's phone buzzed urgently. The Morrison Group board meeting was starting. 18 months of work, 40,000 jobs, his entire business empire hung in the balance. He turned off the phone. "What do you need from me, Detective?" "Your mother's arrest is happening now. We'll need Emma's testimony about any interactions she witnessed, but we'll handle it carefully. The child's been through enough." 20 minutes later, Richard stood outside Emma's school, watching her emerge with a group of new friends, her backpack bouncing as she skipped toward him. Her face lit up when she saw him waiting. "Daddy! Guess what? Mrs. Patterson said yes to the sleepover, and Jessica's mom wants to meet you. And Tommy said his dad has the same car as you." Richard knelt to her level, overwhelmed by the normalcy of her excitement. While he'd been discovering the depths of Victoria's evil, Emma had been making friends and planning sleepovers, being the 7-year-old she deserved to be. "Emma, we need to talk about something important." Her smile faded slightly. "Is it about the sick blood? Did more tests come back?" "No, sweetheart. It's about Grandma Victoria. The police found out she did some very bad things to your mama." Emma's green eyes grew wide, but not entirely surprised. "I knew she was mean. Mama always said mean people sometimes do worse things when they think no one's watching." Richard marveled at his daughter's wisdom. Even at 7, she possessed an emotional intelligence that had taken him 40 years to develop. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now we go home. We have a sleepover to plan, and I need to learn how to make friendship bracelets." Emma giggled, the first pure, joyful sound Richard had heard in days. "You don't know how to make friendship bracelets? I know how to make billion-dollar deals, but friendship bracelets are apparently more complicated." "I'll teach you," Emma said solemnly. "Mama said the best things in life are the ones we share with people we love." As they walked to the car, Richard's phone began buzzing with notifications. The Morrison Group vote had concluded. Merger rejected, stock price tumbling, board of directors demanding emergency meetings. Richard deleted every message without reading them. That evening, surrounded by the chaos of 8 giggling 7-year-olds making friendship bracelets and eating far too much pizza, Richard realized Sarah had been right about everything. The best things in life weren't measured in market caps or merger agreements. They were measured in small hands teaching you to braid colored string. In Emma's laughter, echoing through rooms that had been silent too long, in the way she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder while her friends watched movies, completely trusting that he would keep her safe. A year later, Richard Blackwell, former billionaire, current full-time father, stood in the audience of Emma's school play, video camera ready. His empire had crumbled, but his world had never been more complete. Emma, dressed as a sunflower in the school's spring production, caught his eye from the stage and waved. In that moment, Richard understood the truth Sarah had tried to give him 8 years ago. Love wasn't something to be earned through achievement. It was something to be cherished through presence, and presence, Richard had learned, was the most valuable thing a father could offer. Emma's genetic tests remained clear, her health perfect. Victoria faced life in prison. And Richard discovered that teaching second graders about compound interest was infinitely more rewarding than managing corporate acquisitions. Some empires were worth losing, some battles were worth everything. And some love stories begin with a little girl brave enough to walk 15 miles to find her father, and a father finally brave enough to choose love over legacy.